Welcome to the Deploy Securely podcast, where we go deep on the security, compliance, and privacy implications of using AI. I'm your host, Walter Haydock, founder of StackAware. Today I'm joined by Bezawit Sumner. Bezawit serves as the CISO and Senior Director of Cybersecurity and Compliance for CRISP Shared Services. She spearheads the organization's cybersecurity, information security, and compliance programs, ensuring robust protection and governance for health information exchange partners. Bez, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Walter.
Would you say a little bit more about CRISP Shared Services and its mission?
Yes. So CRISP Shared Services is an organization that is essentially providing HIE technology services to multiple states. First started by developing health information exchange services in the state of Maryland. We built and shown success in the state of Maryland. And once built, there's a realization it could be used many times. And we started providing services to DC and then West Virginia, and now we're up to 10 states. So CRISP Shared Services is this shared model where once the HIE technology services are built, they can be used by multiple states so that the money and funding that's around can be used once instead of each state is trying to do a version of it. So what's actually built for one state can be used by another state. So there could be multiple use cases that one state has and use a bucket of money, and then the same thing can happen in another state. So we have the shared services. We empower each state to go and empower their whatever their services they're trying to do for healthcare. So there's point of care, patient care streamlined at each of these states, and we're able to provide that in a scalable way and economies of scale. So
Awesome. And we do have a healthcare specific audience on the podcast, but for those who might not know, including myself, can you say a little bit more about health information exchanges and what specifically that is doing?
Absolutely. Health information exchanges started as a means to answer the challenge with interoperability. When we went from paper records to electronic records, there were, health records being created for us and on us as patients, but not necessarily the ease of sharing across the different organizations that were creating it. So to help address the interoperability challenges, there was the idea that came up with health information exchanges. So you could be the medium that sits between all these data creators and, the organizations that are creating data on patients. And we can be that agnostic to who's creating the data, but rather get all the data, make that data available at point of care so that there's a patient who goes to 10 different care managers. I don't have to, as a patient, remember what my patient records are or who's saying what on me. So health information exchanges were, sit in the middle to receive all the data, make sure that data is shared at point of care from disparate sources so that there's a complete holistic view of Bezawit Sumner as a patient. And my doctor can help me make an informed decision or can even make an informed decision, having data from multiple places so that we get all the health information, that exchange is made possible. And at the end, the patient is, we get to actually have the benefit of a holistic view as a patient to our care providers.
Understood. So synthesizing records from different formats, different sources into a unified picture. Is that a correct statement? Great.
Yes.
So I think that's a good segue to my next question, because when you have lots of different data formats and sources and provenances, that sounds to me like a potentially good use case for artificial intelligence. Can you talk about how CRISP is approaching AI in the health information exchange space?
Yes. And so the way we look at it as CRISP Shared Services, we want to be enablers of our our partners who we are serving in all the different states. So to think of artificial intelligence is first starting at the level of what type of challenges do we have and where that AI or the form of AI can be helpful to us. So think of it in a sense, starting at healthcare, there are a lot more of the challenges or the risks that we have to manage before we start using. So really the way we're looking at it is, what are some of our challenges, and where do we start from it, and how do we make sure the use of AI is understood by everyone? There's transparency around what we're defining as AI, how it's going to be used. So currently it's not being used at that level because we're taking a very cautious approach of understanding it, understanding the risk, providing and establishing governance and even education, and starting at the challenges of maybe where we can create efficiency so that our the individuals working on these projects can potentially put their time on some other innovative stuff instead of actually going directly to how can AI be used in the challenges of the data sharing or any other of the other elements, right? Because we have multiple stakeholders, you have many risks that you have to consider, and the due diligence has to be there to think through that. So thinking of it as, do we understand it? Do we have the policy? Where is it going to be most helpful? How are we addressing people's concerns? As wide as the concerns can be, we recognize the issues that you have to address, right? We want to be mindful of bias or whatever the case may be. We want people to understand the value. We know the value, but we also have to take it very slowly and know exactly how we're trying to use it and how we're managing risk.
Understood. So on the risk side of things, can you drill down a little bit more? You alluded to the sensitive data that you're handling. Can you talk me through how you're thinking of the risk picture when it comes to your specific use case at CRISP Shared Services?
So the best way I can explain that is to say, we're dealing with healthcare information. We as CSS, as CRISP Shared Services, we're custodians of the data, so we don't necessarily say this is how we're going to use it, but rather listen to our partners and how they would like to use it and how their stakeholders are approving use cases where AI could be used. So really the layer we're on is, how are we all on this? How can we all get on the same page, and then move into the risk management and the governance of it. So CSS is not saying this is how AI is going to be used, but rather listening to our stakeholders and how they would like to use it, and make sure we have the understanding and the governance across CSS and all the stakeholders, so that the sensitivity of it, whatever it may be, each state may have very different policies around AI, and so that's going to be one of those things to consider.
Understood.
Yeah.
So you alluded to the state level requirements when it comes to using AI, specifically in this context. I'm not sure if you've come across these laws, but there are things like Texas's SB 1188, which requires health data record localization within the United States. It applies some requirements to the use of AI in healthcare. Have you seen that come across your radar? Any other specific rules that are top of mind for you?
Not necessarily, and one is when the Texas one. When I'm reading all of these laws that are coming out, I'm looking specifically to the healthcare world and then the states we're in. And right now, I haven't seen anything that's specific to the states we're in, or specifically to healthcare, or even the subset of like health information exchange. What I'm looking at is the precedent that's being set by, some of the states, like, even California, like how they're, the regulation of models, the regulation of training data. So what that would look like, I'm putting in some considerate amount of time to understand the reason why, and of course there needs to be some understanding and governance around it. So I'm looking to the California law, the recent one that was passed, but even within that, there are some provisions to say, is this really going to be applicable, and how do we even measure for it? How do we truly understand our level of control at the organization level, because we're so dependent on all of the tools that we're using that also have AI. So some of the state laws that I've seen, I haven't seen anything specific to healthcare. So that's what I'm really focusing on.
Understood.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you're referring to the California Transparency in Frontier Artificial Intelligence Act. Is that a correct?
Yes. Reference? I couldn't remember yes, that's the one.
Yeah. The easily remembered TFIA, Yeah,
The
it's
fire. There you
yeah,
go.
Tafaya. If you use the acronym, yeah, really rolls off the tongue easily. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think that's a super interesting bill. It applies to frontier model developers, and then specifically, kind of, it has multiple tiers. It has the highest tier, which is clearly targeted at the big companies over
Hmm.
$500 million in revenue, and but also has some requirements for smaller frontier model developers. Are you do you have thoughts on what the regulatory landscape should look like specifically when it comes to healthcare? Or you feel free to pass and move on to the next question.
No, I can, on a very personal level, right? I think of myself in the not I think of myself because I am a patient. So, in my role as a CISO for a nonprofit organization that's serving multiple states, I always think, as a patient, what would I like to see from the organizations that are handling the data? Because I know the benefit of, you know, the data management, the exchange of data, the governance, and the transparency is really what I will look for, right? If I was not working in cyber or in healthcare, and specifically at an organization that's serving multiple HIEs, I would want to know the organization is taking the time to understand. So the regulations I would like to see is a dynamic review of what are we really trying to do with AI? Do we know the effects of it? Even if we don't know, how do we make sure there's an iterative process? How do we make sure there's a point in time check where if we deploy something, there's a way to check for whatever we're intending for it to be used. And if it's not doing it, it's also essentially can say, oh, then on to the next one, right? So the transparency, a dynamic review, and a strong partnership between organizations and the states or federal government to be able to say, we really don't know much about what could happen. We know the potentials of it, and there is an extreme of all the risks that we see with AI. So if there's transparency, education, iterative process, there's an actual life cycle, and there's a feedback loop. If the regulation can somehow tie these things instead of saying the thou shall of the binary of this or that, that would be, and I know that sounds ideal, but that's the way I think about it, because there's a lot of unknown, and that's fair, right? Because we haven't been able to see how AI can be this useful until, like, the late 2022 into early 2023, right? With when it became so available to everyone. So there needs to be time to catch up for people to understand it, transparency, education for people to be able to ask questions. So there's not a lot of black box. As a patient, if I have a question to an organization that is, providing me with care, and they're exchanging data because it's ultimately going to serve me, I would like to make sure there's that ease of, oh, I can go understand what they're doing about it. I can go understand that they're taking as much precaution as possible so that it's not going to ultimately harm me as an individual.
Understood. So
Yeah.
comprehensive but reasonable guardrails sounds like the approach
Yes.
that you're advocating. Got it.
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I'll add my 2 cents in that.
Yeah.
I've seen I've seen an array of laws come out that I'd say specifically in Illinois, which essentially bans the use of AI in behavioral healthcare. I
Mm.
think these types of laws are misdirected potentially
Mm.
because, especially in the behavioral healthcare space, there's a shortage of providers, and you can point to examples where chatbots have given bad advice, or some people have alleged have even caused them to harm themselves. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, I think we need to look at all the people who don't have access to care, who don't have health care, or they don't have very good health care, or it's just difficult to get an appointment. Like, that's something that I have to deal with all the time. And having a release valve for folks in those types of situations, I think, is really critical, because it's all well and good to say, well, you need a licensed medical provider to say anything about healthcare. If you say that, then you're just going to really push up the cost of care, and then people are just not gonna they're not gonna seek care, they're not gonna seek advice, they're just
Mm.
going to do their own thing. So I think there's a happy medium to be had. I would say that the Illinois law is too aggressive in my view, but I think Texas has some merits to it, specifically the SB 1188 law, which looks at it requires that any AI used in the use of care meet the standards that are set out by the medical board, the Texas Medical Board. So I think that's the right approach. It doesn't say, you must not use AI. It just says you must meet the same standard using AI.
Yeah. And that is the, to your point of like a happy medium, what I've been thinking about, and I was recently on a panel in Maryland, and we were talking, the use of AI and, how organizations are considering using it. One of the things that came to mind for me was like, we shouldn't assume perfection, or we shouldn't expect perfection of it, right? It's to be able to work on a process that gets us to a happy medium is what's going to be the most helpful. And understanding the objective we're also trying to achieve with the laws and regulations that we're adhering to, or whoever is able to influence. And so as long as there's no perfection of like when something happens, like, oh, it's because you got this wrong, we should be ready for the experimental phase of these regulations. Some states are going to work, others are not. And, how can we have sort of like a lessons learned and cautionary tales, and what really worked well? Can we adopt it in different states? And there could be variations. If some states, there are going to be some stricter rules and laws around it. That's as it should be, right? But if we can have that lessons learned, and we just have that very human response to, we want to make this work, I think we can get to that happy medium and not expect perfection from any of the involved parties, like, the private public sector partnership or regulations or organizations or companies that are taking a deep dive to understand the regulations. So, these companies that are spending the time to be experts to come and inform organizations, those are going to be very helpful as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think not expecting perfection is important. And the case of autonomous vehicles, I think, is very instructive, because right now, if there's an accident involving an autonomous vehicle and someone's hurt or killed, that's front page news. But what's not front page news is the fact that 40,000 people every year die in car crashes in the United States. So, if we're looking on one end, you've got an autonomous vehicle that could potentially reduce accident rates by a factor of 100, 1,000. And then the other end, you've got human drivers who are pretty bad, objectively bad. I think you got to take a hard look at the lesser of two evils there.
Yes. It's sometimes I think about this. I think it's the human nature of, when something new is happening, it should be better than what we already have, instead of it allowing it time to go through the maturation steps, or maturity steps of, okay, starting out learning, like there's an evolution of it, right? And so, but I don't think we can help ourselves but to expect that whatever something is new, when we pick it up, it has to be some n times x times number better than the previous one. So I think that's part of our human response and human nature to want that.
Yeah, we may have gotten a little spoiled when it comes to technology.
Yeah. And we forget how long it took for something to be as good as we know it, or as we are experiencing it now, to the amount of time it worked, it took to get to that level of perfection, in a sense, or whatever that version is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So to change gears a little bit, in terms of risk management for AI, what are the biggest risks or single risk that you see that is not really on people's radars right now?
I didn't see this until I came across a really helpful documentation from an executive coaching thing that I went to. The risks are the inherent misunderstanding of AI. Maybe I would even start from there. Even for me, it was this path I had to get on to understand. Okay, when I'm trying to think of risk for the organization, how we're thinking about risk for the organization for AI, how are we defining AI? How are what has the evolution of AI been? And because there needed to be this conversation around the predictive modeling, machine learning, we've always been using AI. So the risk I think I see is we're not all aligned when we're talking about AI risk. So it could be specific to an organization, but at least I've seen it in different states. So, or in the different conversations I've been in. So, one risk, and maybe people are thinking about it, but it's the definition of it, the levels of it, and the tiering of risk when it comes to where we're trying to use, maybe as we're really focused on like generative AI. Is it in the note taking tools? Is it in the the newest fanciest project management AI tool that can do half the work for me, whatever the case may be? So it's in that misalignment and all the different levels of understanding and definitions we have of AI. I think that's one of the risks that I'm thinking about that maybe is not as forefront as I would like it to be, or as I would like it to, as I would like to see it, and the different stakeholders and how risk is being viewed at their level. Is as a CISO, my risk lens is going to be specific versus the legal general counsel or privacy officer, or even our HR director and our executives, our board members. So that, I think, the risk, everyone should have their puzzle pieces when they come to risk and be able to put it together so we can have a larger picture. We shouldn't all be coming in, we're saying, oh, this is the risk. And if it's just one risk, I don't think we're looking at it the right way. So I will say that's the second thing I'm thinking about from AI and risk management in general. And lastly, it's really more so the risk of like to use or to not use generative AI. And I think an organization, any organization should be able to make that decision and say, we will or we will not use generative AI or any of the other AIs in a risk management standpoint to say, because of this, or are we using it because because we need it for the business. So I think we can do that from a risk management standpoint. At least we can look back and say, 2 years ago, this is how we thought about risk. This is where we are. And then we can all be on the same page and we allow ourselves to change. And so to loop it back to what I learned from a risk standpoint that I didn't see or understand prior to, myself, I'm trying to educate myself around AI. How do I make sure, we're not standing in the way of innovation? Like we as in security is not standing in the way of innovation because of the risk management. It is this idea, like a lot of the risk that we think about with AI falls within the same domains of access control, data exfiltration, and all the other elements. But the big piece I learned is this Venn diagram of, okay, the risk that regardless of what you do should always be managed, which is access control and such. But the other ones is just understanding, depending on the type of AI we're using, whether it's prompt injection or whether it's, data poisoning, or whatever the case may be, understanding it from the OWASP standpoint or from the NIST standpoint. And what I'm referencing is the Databricks risk management framework. That was very helpful to me because we went through this exercise of, hey, there may be like 100 and something risks, but 80% of them, they're already risks you know how to manage. So make sure you focus on those and then have the actual expertise within your organization to be able to manage those risks. So alignment, making sure we're all, we have the opportunity to say we can or cannot use or shouldn't use AI for whatever reason, and then being able to upskill the individuals that are working on it in order to help manage risk for the organization.
If I could, I'll try to summarize your comments in one word, which is scoping. Which
Very well, yeah.
Is that accurate?
That's fair, yeah.
If I had to do one word,
That's fair, yeah. Scoping, exactly, and yeah, that's because it's iterative, yeah.
And I think in any exercise, any risk management exercise, scoping is really important because
Yeah.
if you're not clear about what you're talking about, then it's very difficult to start managing risks associated with it. And you mentioned the terminology being an issue. I'll point out that in California alone, in the same state, two different agencies have issued two different definitions. One, automated decision systems from one regulation related specifically to employment law, and then another, ADMT, automated decision making technology, which is issued by the California Privacy Protection Agency as it relates to CCPA regulations. So even in the same state, we have dueling terminology where they kind of overlap in that Venn diagram that you mentioned, and it's not we're not even using the same words in the same state government. So it can definitely be challenging.
Yeah, and we're not all, and then even within an organization, and I didn't know about that, but that goes to the point, right? It's even within an organization, we're not all starting from the same place, because even if I'm not working on AI in my day job and my current responsibilities, I may be an enthusiast for AI, so I may be learning about it outside of work. So it's making sure if we can all spend the time to get up to speed and we're all starting from the same level, then same starting point, I think we can advance further than what we're doing right now, because everyone is at different points, and catching up, a lot has changed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So on the note of risks that people should be tracking but aren't, what do you think is a commonly held but mistaken belief when it comes to AI or AI governance and security?
That AI is just another software. It's a challenging one for me, and I took it on as a challenge because I'm like, oh, I think other times we can come into a room and we can have a conversation around risk and everyone is essentially on the same page. And so that the AI is just another software, something that I am actively trying to work through, because I don't believe so. I don't agree with that, like equating it, just AI as another software. So that's one I believe is a challenge.
I think a comparison that someone else made, this guy Balaji Srinivasan, he was talking about AI compared to a traditional application programming interface. An API is very fault intolerant. So if you get one character wrong when you make an API call, you'll get an error. But
Yeah.
the responses are highly predictable. But if you flip that and you look at generative AI, it's highly fault tolerant. You can kind of give it almost not quite gibberish, but almost gibberish, or you can just send it stream of consciousness and it will give you a response you can use. But it is not predictable in its outputs, and it could be wrong when it comes out. So I think that's a useful model for capturing what you're describing. What do you think?
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I wrote it down. I'm going to use it.
Awesome. I'll send you their podcast. I shouldn't be advertising other people's podcasts on my podcast, but I'll send you that podcast link if you're interested.
Just shows the confidence you have in your podcast. You're listening to others.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So as we start to wrap up, I just wanted to see if there's anything you want to plug, any personal projects, any CRISP shared services projects, anything going on that you think might be of interest to the audience. It could be your own blog, your own LinkedIn profile, your own charity, anything that you'd like to plug to our audience.
Oh, wow. I'll leave it from I'll do it from a personal standpoint. One thing I'm really focused on is the understanding that the privilege that we have to take the time to understand AI and the use of AI, and the fact that individually where we work and how we're trying to educate ourselves and educate the community or whomever, right, on the AI use. So I would say whatever we can do individually at organization levels to take the time to, not whatever we're educating, we educate the individuals that are going to be the consumers of whatever we're putting out there. So I will say that's what I'm focused on, and from my individual world and trying to understand it as much as what I'm trying to put out, like, to inform and educate at the organization level where I'm at. And so I will say, let's, focus on transparency, education, so that we can demystify the fear of AI, but rather say, we know what we know and we're working towards and working very hard to work on, and to understand what we don't know, or to, to bring it up to a discussion point so we can try to find the best solution in the moment. And then if it doesn't work, we can move on to the next one.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
Well, Bez, thank you very much for coming on the show. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in to the Deploy Securely podcast. We will see you next time.
Thank you for having me, Walter.